Have you ever found yourself giving your all, staying silent, playing it cool, just to keep someone's attention? Let me ask you this. What if the very things you're doing to keep their respect are the exact things making them take you for granted? If you're tired of feeling like you're never quite enough no matter how much you give, it's time to flip the script. Respect doesn't come from shrinking. It comes from standing tall. Let's talk about what to stop doing if you want to be truly valued. We often mistake patience for strength, when in reality, it can become a slow erosion of self-respect. There's a point where understanding turns into enabling, where empathy turns into self-abandonment. That point comes when excuses start replacing truth, when someone repeatedly fails to show up emotionally, physically, or mentally. And instead of facing that reality, there's a growing list of justifications. He's probably busy. Maybe I'm asking for too much. I shouldn't be so sensitive. These are the quiet internal dialogues that slowly chip away at standards. At first, it feels like grace, giving someone space, allowing them to have off days, believing that they're just struggling with something they haven't spoken about. But if the inconsistencies continue, and the treatment doesn't match the care that's being offered, those repeated rationalizations stop being thoughtful. They start being a disservice. When someone acts in a way that's dismissive or neglectful, and the response is to double down on empathy, the focus shifts entirely. It becomes about fixing, saving, understanding, anything but acknowledging that this isn't enough. And the longer that dynamic continues, the harder it becomes to see clearly. What started as kindness becomes a habit of minimizing one's own needs. That habit forms in subtle ways. It looks like silencing the voice that says, "I feel hurt," and replacing it with, "They probably didn't mean it." It looks like interpreting a lack of effort as a sign of being busy, rather than a sign of misaligned priorities. It's postponing conversations because the moment never feels quite right, or because there's a fear that bringing up a concern will scare them away. But real connection doesn't require walking on eggshells. It doesn't need you to rewrite stories in your head just to keep things afloat. If something feels off, consistently, it probably is, and pretending otherwise doesn't protect the relationship. It only postpones the inevitable erosion of trust and self-worth. Making excuses for someone else's repeated indifference or mistreatment becomes a form of self-gaslighting. It's convincing yourself that what you're experiencing isn't real or valid, that your needs are too much, that your standards are unreasonable. And the longer this continues, the more distorted your view becomes of what love and care should actually look like. You start to believe that being overlooked is normal, that emotional unavailability is just part of the package, that you have to earn affection rather than receive it freely. But affection shouldn't be conditional. Connection shouldn't be so difficult to hold on to. And if it constantly feels like you're reaching out only to be met with emptiness, that isn't love. It's chasing something that may never fully arrive. Making excuses is often rooted in hope, the hope that things will get better, that maybe this is just a phase, that effort will eventually be reciprocated. But hope without honesty becomes toxic. It turns into a reason to stay stuck in a place where you're constantly shrinking to maintain peace, where you're managing their potential more than their reality. And the truth is, no one should be managing anyone. A relationship should be a shared responsibility, with two people showing up for each other. Not perfectly, not without flaws, but with intention, with care, with consistency. When that's absent, no amount of justification can fill the gap. It takes strength to stop explaining away the behavior, to stop bending the truth to fit a more comforting narrative. It takes strength to face the discomfort of reality rather than the fantasy of what you wish it could be. And most importantly, it takes self-respect to say, this doesn't feel good, and I don't need to keep convincing myself that it does. The fear often lies in what happens when the excuses stop. There's a sense that letting go of the justifications means letting go of the entire connection. But what's really being let go of is the illusion. The illusion that someone will change if you just keep holding on. That things will click into place if you keep giving more, waiting more, understanding more. What replaces that illusion is clarity. And clarity is powerful. It allows you to see the patterns for what they are, not what you wish they could be. It gives you the ability to make choices rooted in truth, not fantasy. And in that clarity, you remember what you deserve, not just in words, but in consistent action. The process begins by listening to what's actually happening, not what you hope is happening. If communication is one-sided, acknowledge that. If effort only appears after conflict, recognize that pattern. If presence is only offered when convenient, notice it. Don't dress it up in nicer language to avoid discomfort. The discomfort is a signal. It's asking you to pay attention. That doesn't mean rushing to judgment or expecting perfection. It means paying attention to how consistently someone shows up, to how they respond to your needs, not just when things are easy, but when it requires effort, to how they communicate when you're hurting. The moments when real character shows are often the quietest ones, the ignored messages, the missed calls, the forgotten promises. Excuses mask these moments, blur them, make them easier to live with. But in doing so, they also train you to abandon your own voice. They teach you that being treated as optional is acceptable. And over time, you start to internalize that treatment as a reflection of your worth. But it's not. Your worth has nothing to do with someone else's lack of effort. It's not determined by how little they give or how much you tolerate. It's defined by your own standards, your own self-love, your own boundaries. And boundaries can't exist in a space where excuses override the truth. Replacing excuses with truth doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't require anger or confrontation. It's often a quiet shift in mindset. A decision to stop rewriting the narrative, to stop editing yourself, to stay likable, to stop playing small just to keep someone close. It's a return to honesty. And with honesty comes strength. The strength to say, I don't need to carry both sides of this. The strength to accept that showing love doesn't mean sacrificing dignity. The strength to walk away from anything that repeatedly makes you question your value. Because love that's real, love that's healthy, doesn't ask for excuses. It asks for presence, effort, and mutual care. And anything less than that should never be explained away. Giving too much too soon often comes from a beautiful place, a desire to connect, to show love, to create something meaningful. But when that generosity goes unchecked, when it isn't mirrored with mutual investment, it starts to feel less like connection and more like chasing. Overinvesting early on sends a powerful message, not just to the other person, but to yourself. It says, I have to prove I'm worthy of being chosen. It shifts the energy from shared curiosity to subtle desperation. At the root of this pattern is often a fear of not being enough, of losing something before it's even been fully built. That fear leads to overcompensating through gifts, affection, time, emotional labor, and even just constantly being available. The problem isn't in being kind or generous. It's in pouring all of that into a space where nothing has been earned yet. In doing so, expectations aren't being set, they're being erased. When one person is showing up with all the effort and the other is barely meeting the conversation halfway, the dynamic becomes skewed. It starts to resemble a performance. One side trying to impress, prove, please, the other just receiving, watching, benefiting. And once that becomes the norm, it's hard to undo. Because what you give at the beginning often becomes the baseline, not the exception. If you're showing up with emotional support, quality time, thoughtfulness, and reliability right out of the gate, without allowing space for reciprocity, you're effectively saying, this is what I give for free. Relationships don't require grand gestures to begin. They require curiosity, attention, and time. Trust needs to be built, not assumed. Affection needs space to grow, not pressure to perform. When you overinvest too early, you rob both people of the natural pace that allows a connection to develop authentically. You start skipping steps, ones that are crucial for assessing compatibility, values, intentions. There's also a tendency to create stories in your head based on potential rather than paying attention to what's actually happening. Investment becomes a way of trying to control the outcome. If you just give more, care more, do more, then maybe things will fall into place. But relationships are not equations. More effort doesn't always equal deeper connection. Sometimes more effort just means more imbalance. People can sense when someone is giving out of fear rather than confidence. And overinvesting too soon often comes from insecurity, not malicious or desperate, just unsure of whether it's okay to receive, unsure of whether love can be mutual, unsure of what will happen if you don't constantly prove your worth. That kind of uncertainty tends to push away the very things you want to attract: respect, admiration, desire. True confidence shows up in restraint. It shows up in holding space for someone to meet you halfway instead of sprinting the full distance alone. It's being okay with pauses, with uncertainty, with allowing things to unfold rather than trying to script every chapter. It's knowing that you bring value by being present, not by being excessive. Overinvesting can also come at the cost of your identity. In trying so hard to be seen, you may start molding yourself into someone else's idea of desirable. You begin to anticipate what will make you more appealing, more agreeable, more accommodating. And then who cares? And in that process, you may lose sight of your own boundaries, preferences, and needs. You become so focused on being chosen that you forget to choose. Giving with intention means observing first. It means asking, is this being met with appreciation, or is it being taken for granted? Is this person leaning in, or am I dragging the weight of this connection alone? These questions don't come from bitterness. They come from discernment. And discernment is crucial when it comes to preserving your energy, your heart, and your time. There's a cultural narrative that love has to be grand and all-consuming from day one. That if you really care, you should be willing to give endlessly. But real connection doesn't need theatrics. It needs alignment. You don't have to earn someone's care. It should flow naturally through shared effort and mutual interest. Overinvesting disrupts that balance. It creates a situation where one person becomes the giver, the fixer, the emotional anchor, and the other simply receives, often without ever needing to step up. The antidote is simple, but not always easy. Wait. Observe. Match energy. Hold space for what you want instead of trying to manufacture it. That doesn't mean playing games or being emotionally withholding. It means giving in a way that honors yourself first. It means being generous with your time and energy after it's been shown that the other person values it, not just assumes it. When your default is to overinvest, there's a risk of becoming resentful over time. Not necessarily because of how much you gave, but because of how little it was valued. That sting doesn't come from generosity. It comes from misalignment. And the sooner you recognize it, the better you can protect yourself from that slow growing sense of disappointment. You also begin to realize that some connections fade not because something went wrong, but because they were never built on equal ground. Overinvesting masks that truth for a while. It gives the illusion of closeness, of intimacy, of forward momentum. But when effort is one-sided, the connection becomes fragile. It becomes a house built on air. Beautiful, but unsustainable. When someone values you, you won't need to overextend. You won't need to initiate every conversation, fix every issue, plan every meeting, or anticipate every emotional need. You'll be met. You'll be matched. You'll be mirrored. And in that space, Generosity becomes a celebration, not a negotiation. What you offer to someone early on sets the tone for how they engage with you. If you teach someone that your love, time, energy, and emotional labor come without boundaries, they will naturally begin to operate within that structure. But if you hold your value, give intentionally, and allow space for them to show you who they are without overwhelming the dynamic, you create the conditions for mutual respect. You are not responsible for carrying the weight of two people's emotions. You are not obligated to over-deliver just to feel secure. And you don't need to rush connection. It's not a race. It's a rhythm. Let the rhythm unfold. Let the other person reveal themselves. Let the energy be matched, not just for their sake, but for yours. There's a deep cultural conditioning that teaches silence is strength, that keeping things light and easy makes a person more desirable. The idea is that being chill or low maintenance somehow makes someone more attractive, more valuable. But in trying to be agreeable, in trying to avoid conflict, standards often get buried beneath a mask of cool indifference. And that mask, while seemingly protective, becomes a barrier between authenticity and connection. That is a sign of insecurity. And that mask, while seemingly protective, becomes a barrier between authenticity and connection. The pressure to seem unbothered leads to withholding the truth about what feels right, what feels off, what feels necessary. Needs become edited down to seem more palatable. Boundaries become blurred in the name of not appearing difficult. Desires get watered down to appear less intense. And all of this effort to maintain a certain image comes at a cost. The cost of being seen, respected, and understood for who you really are. Pretending that nothing affects you or that you're always okay with whatever's offered might feel like a shield against rejection, but what it really does is signal that your needs are optional, that your preferences are flexible, that your voice is quiet enough to be ignored without consequence. And over time, this behavior becomes internalized. You start to believe that speaking up is dangerous, that expressing yourself will drive people away, that asking for more is too much. But being easygoing isn't what creates closeness. What creates closeness is clarity, the courage to say, this is what I value, or this is what I expect from someone I let into my life. There's nothing confrontational about expressing a boundary or a standard. It's not an attack. It's not an ultimatum. It's simply information. Information that gives others the opportunity to meet you where you are or to step aside. The fear of coming across as needy or high minimal often stems from a desire to be chosen. But being chosen for a version of yourself that isn't whole, isn't fully honest, isn't rooted in your truth, is not a win. It's a slow form of erasure. Each time a standard is suppressed for the sake of appearing more likable, something vital is sacrificed: integrity. True self-respect shows up not just in big declarations, but in the tiny, everyday moments where you choose to be honest instead of agreeable. It shows up when you say no to something that doesn't feel right, when you ask a clarifying question instead of pretending everything's fine, when you choose to express rather than suppress. Authenticity doesn't drive the right people away, it draws them in. It filters out situations where you would have had to shrink to fit. That filtering is a gift, not a loss. It means that what remains is aligned, and what's aligned is sustainable. Pretending to be chill may work in the short term, but eventually the truth rises. Needs that were buried begin to resurface. Expectations that were never spoken start to leak out as frustration or confusion. Communication is the foundation of any meaningful connection. Without it, assumptions take over, and assumptions are dangerous because they often default to the lowest effort. If nothing is asked for, nothing is offered. If boundaries aren't stated, they're assumed not to exist. That silence becomes permission, not because of malice, but because that's what was modeled. There's nothing inherently wrong with flexibility, with patience, with compromise, but those things need to come after clarity, not in place of it. Being agreeable should be a choice, not a default. And it should never come at the expense of your needs being met. Confidence isn't loud or demanding, it's quiet clarity. It's the ability to say, this is what I require to feel safe and valued, and not flinch, not apologize, not soften the words to sound more digestible. That kind of clarity creates safety, not just for you, but for the dynamic as a whole. It sets expectations. It opens the door for others to share what's true for them too. The idea that expressing standards makes someone less desirable is a myth. Standards show that there's something to be earned, something to be respected. They say, I value myself enough to protect my peace. That's not intimidating, it's magnetic. People are drawn to those who know what they want and are willing to stand by it without games, without manipulation, without fear. When standards are hidden to seem more likable, there's a quiet resentment that starts to build. Moments where something doesn't feel good are dismissed. Moments where clarity is needed are avoided. Over time, those small sacrifices add up. You start to feel disconnected, not just from the situation, but from yourself. You begin to question your worth, not because it's diminished, but because it hasn't been reflected. Being honest about what you need isn't a risk, it's a necessity. It creates the space for mutual growth, mutual respect, mutual understanding. It weeds out situations that would have wasted your energy. It allows you to move with dignity rather than desperation. It puts the power back in your hands, not to control others, but to choose weakness. That showing care, setting boundaries, asking for clarity somehow makes you too intense. But vulnerability is power. It requires more courage to express a truth than to hide behind silence. It takes more strength to say what you want than to pretend you don't care. You can be kind and assertive, soft and strong, open and discerning. These things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they amplify each other. The more you honor your own voice, the more trustworthy you become to yourself. And when you trust yourself, you stop fearing what others might think. You stop needing constant validation. You begin to act from self-worth rather than self-doubt. If something matters to you, speak on it. If something feels off, acknowledge it. If you have a standard, name it. You don't have to explain it, justify it, or soften it. Your needs are not a burden. They're a blueprint, a roadmap for how to love you well. If someone can't follow that roadmap, it doesn't mean you're too much. It means they're not your match. Pretending to be easygoing when you're not only delays the inevitable. Either your truth comes out later, when it's more difficult to express, or you stay in something that never had the capacity to support you fully. Neither option serves your joy. It's not your role to make everything effortless for others. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to speak your needs. You are allowed to say, this is what works for me. Not with arrogance, but with confidence. Not with force, but with calm certainty. You don't need to prove your value by being quiet about what matters to you. The very act of standing in your truth, of expressing it with kindness and clarity is proof of your value. And that's a kind of energy that attracts the right people, the right dynamics, the right kind of love, not because you chased it, but because you made space for it by refusing to settle for anything less.